Greetings YouTube, this is your resident Land Cruiser nut once again. Welcome you back to the channel. As you can see, my FJ80 is finally registered. It took almost 2 months to get this done, and if you don't know about the German Tuv inspection, very difficult to pass, especially with an older vehicle. The way it goes is when you go into the registration office, they'll give you 30 days to register your vehicle with a temporary plate. If you can't get it registered in that time period, they will give you a 30-day extension. And if you go past that 30-day extension, the very last extension they will give you is a 1-day extension. I was on that 1-day extension when I finally got this vehicle to pass inspection. Okay, so let's move over to the back and I'll show you how this angle grinder fixed my problem. If you remember in the previous video, I mentioned I failed the inspection because of a lack of pressure to the rear wheels. I ended up making all the adjustments that one could possibly make to the load proportioning valve, and it didn't help at all. I had already replaced the brake master cylinder, the brake booster. I bled the system multiple times and decided, you know what, I'm going to bleed it one last time. And after that didn't change my problem either. I still wasn't getting very much pressure to the rear wheels. So I basically gave up after I used all the knowledge that I had and decided to take it over to a shop. And this is where the story actually got worse. I don't want to name the shop, but actually telling this story makes me want to drink a beer. That's a good idea. No, I'm not sponsored by Sam Adams, but I wish. Anyway, the shop calls me after a day and tells me that yes, the load proportioning valve sensor is bad. So I went ahead and ordered a new one from Toyota. It took about 2 weeks to get the part, so in the meantime I called a few people to help diagnose the problem. I called a company called Lead Brakes. Lead Brakes mostly deals with older GM and Ford vehicles. However, a lot of these older vehicles still use the same type of brake system. The gentleman on the phone asked if I was able to bleed the valve, and I said yes. He asked, is it leaking? I told him no. And finally, can you move the piston up and down? And I said yes. And he said, then it's not the load sensing proportioning valve. You need to start looking somewhere else. So I go back to the shop who has my vehicle and tell them what the experts at Lead Brakes said. The shop then tells me that they're going to call in the best brake guy they have from another shop and have him take a look. A few days later, I get called and told it's my new brake master cylinder from Cruiser Outfitters. I immediately called Cruiser Outfitters, who I ordered the master cylinder from, and asked if they had ever had a brake master cylinder go bad out of the box. The gentleman on the phone said no, but he has heard about a lot of them installed correctly. And I was thinking to myself, well, I installed the new one, and I looked at the old master cylinder and the old rod length on the brake booster and just assumed that I did it correctly based on this and on this setting here. I called the shop back and asked them to double check the push rod length to make sure that I had made the correct adjustments on the brake booster. To my surprise, a day later they called and said my truck was ready for pickup, so I'm assuming that they adjusted this push rod length because I did something wrong. Before I paid for my vehicle, I took it on a test drive, and I did not make it very far when I noticed my front brakes began to lock up and would not release. I talked to the technician and leave it at the shop, and a few more days go by after that, and then I'm told that it's more than likely I'm going to need new front calipers. I could not believe this was the suggestion, because I went from having front brakes that worked perfectly but had no pressure to the rear. Now you're telling me that I needed a new master cylinder, that it was my load valve proportioning sensor, and now you're telling me that my front calipers are bad. I talked to the service manager about this, and he agreed with me and said that just sounds like someone's guessing. And so he said leave it a couple more days and we'll see if we can just figure it out. And the great thing about this is they were not charging me to do the work, and they said they weren't going to charge me unless they solved the problem. So I go back in, and a few days later I'm greeted with again that it's the master cylinder. It's kind of at this point that I'm getting a little furious because I cannot do anything with the vehicle because it can't drive. So at this point I go over and begin working on my own truck in the shop's parking lot while they are closed. I called Lead Brakes again, and these guys were absolutely great. I was told to remove the brake master cylinder from the brake booster, and if doing that, if the front brakes were released, that means there was a problem with the boost. Now, however, if you remove this brake master cylinder and the front brakes would not have released, that means there would be a problem with the actual booster itself. That was the best advice I had gotten on where to start solving this problem. So I went ahead and started doing the work. Once I removed the master cylinder, the front calipers released. I was starting to believe the brake booster itself was bad. I had ordered it from Rock Auto, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't the most expensive one. So then I went to remove the brake booster, and I was preparing to send it back. When I have both brake boosters sitting next to each other, that I just happened to drop a bolt, and I went down to pick it up, and as I'm popping back up, that other booster sitting right here, and I noticed something that I had not noticed before, that this rod on the new booster was actually longer than this rod. You never would have noticed it if you're standing up and you're looking at it from this angle. Now, before you criticize, just keep in mind, not only did I miss this, but 3 other mechanics also missed this. So this was another problem that wasn't obvious, and when you got down at that angle, you realized that the new one was about 8 millimeters longer. And so when I put this on, I took the clevis, and I just, on the new one, and just matched it up to where it was on here, and it was just a few threads down, so I counted the threads and put it on, and that was it. I never would have guessed, like I said, that from this angle that rod was longer than it was. This is where the angle grinder comes in, because all I did was grab the angle grinder on the new one, and I cut off the 8 millimeters, put the clevis back on, and then put everything back together, and the truck worked perfect. I was actually so thrilled, but I wasn't quite done there yet. This is the final adjustment I wanted to make. This is a brake pressure gauge that Lead Brake sent me. I highly recommend you add these to one of your kit. It's only $50, and it will let you know that your pressure on all 4 corners is absolutely correct as per the FSM when complete. All you do is take this little gadget right here, you plug it into the calipers, and you have someone in there pump the brakes, and it'll tell you the PSI, and then you can go back to the load positioning sensor and make the adjustments until you get where you need to be. But guys, that is all it for this project for now. Although it's only been registered for a week, I did have another problem pop up, and I walked outside one day and I noticed that my steering gearbox is leaking quite bad. So that will be the next video in the series, is rebuilding this. I've already ordered the parts, so they should be here in a couple weeks. Now, lastly, I just want to thank all of my subscribers. I appreciate all 283 of you. Hopefully I can get to 300 by the end of this video. If you do like what I'm producing, please just like, share, and subscribe.